Welcome to the Aesopians podcast, where the wisest in the channel come to get their MSP marketing insights. Today we're going to be talking about cold email marketing for MSPs and featuring Jeffery Newton, who has extensive experience running cold email campaigns for MSPs to help them acquire new customers. So let's jump into the episode. All right, welcome to the latest episode of the Aesopians podcast. I'm here with Jeffery Newton, and he's going to talk to us a little bit today about doing some cold email for MSPs. But first, Jeff, could get over to you here, and why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Thank you very much, Hunter. So Jeffery Newton, been in the MSP space for 18 years before pivoting over to being a vendor. And so I'm currently the co-founder of Cyft, where we're bringing voice as an interface to the MSPs to unlock their business systems. So voice plus AI equals things done right the first time is essentially the just for the Cyft side. But spent 18 years in MSP before that. First 11 years was on the technical side, kind of climbing the ranks, if you will, on the tech side. Wasn't ever the best at any of the technical stuff, but I understood people. And so I knew who was the smartest person in the room, and I knew how to unlock them to help me get unstuck. And after those 11 years, I pivoted to the sales and marketing side. So I did a little bit of a stint in the VCIO seat, kind of back before that term was really dawned or bastardized in our industry. This would have been about 8, 9 years ago. And then quickly, about a year, maybe 2 years after that, went over to the full-on sales side. So became a sales executive, and then eventually took on a team, sales director, and then VP of sales and marketing, and ran both sales and marketing for 2 different MSPs for the last 8 years of that journey.
That kind of totally resonates with me. I was a .NET developer for a while, and I had bosses at two separate companies be like, you're not a developer, you're not a developer, and I'm like, I feel like I was a pretty good developer, but
Yeah.
being able to talk to people and the sales and marketing side is kind of a draw, and it kind of pulls you in.
hmm
So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of specifically were you doing, like tech wise? Were you more on like cloud or networking, or before you
No,
kind of got into?
I was like, I was the universal soldier. Like, and oftentimes some of the MSPs even called me like the paratrooper because I knew enough about each of the disciplines that they could literally drop me into a shitstorm, and then I would handle the tech side, but I would navigate the client side more effectively, right? So it was actually more about building and maintaining the relationship so that even though we were in the middle of this crazy disaster, we came out of it with a stronger relationship with the client and the tech stuff was solved. So I spent a lot of time kind of in those roles for those first 10-ish years. Although I did a short period of time as a implementation engineer. So that's really where I cut my teeth on more like infrastructure deployment. And it would have been still a generalist, right? So I was racking and stacking servers, I was spinning up hypervisors, but I was also configuring, Cisco Catalyst crap with the CLI and stuff, or not crap, but like that kind of equipment through the CLI. So generally speaking, kind of everything that you'd expect in a traditional like mid-sized MSP reality. I think networking is the part that I enjoyed the most. It was also the steepest learning curve, overcoming a CLI with Cisco when I have no education, no formal training, no nothing, right? And then like trying to figure out, wow, the world works without a GUI, which to a developer you'd understand, but to a guy that just sort of fell into MSP work, that was a unique experience. But I really enjoyed it because it was so black and white. Like it either was or it wasn't, right? And like troubleshooting it was also relatively simple most of the time, unless it was DNS. But
Yeah, there's definitely like an element of creative problem solving in both disciplines, where in on the tech side it's definitely a little bit more black and white, and then on the sales side it's a little bit more, ambiguous and
yeah.
experience driven, I think.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. And I found the more I clung to process and rigidity and like purism on the sales side early was the faster it would fail as well because there's so much more nuance to it. um, and so it became like framework was the closest word I would ever use even when I was leading and running my teams. Like I threw the word process out, right? Everyone preaches that you need to have a sales process. And like to an extent you do, but it's not nearly as meaningful as the fluidity that a framework offers you and that you can bring to the table. But from a sales and selling standpoint, I found the only real process that ever mattered was the buyer's buying process. Like, what did they need to go through to make their decision? And so, me forcing them through an MSP version of a sales process was like actively throwing friction into their process of making a decision. And it was like treating it like a meat grinder rather than a facilitation of them needing to navigate what they needed to navigate to get to the decision to either move forward or not. And so that was a big thing that we flipped that really amplified the conversion we started to see all across really the stages of our sales process, was putting the focus on the buyer and the buying journey rather than the sales process itself.
Yeah, yeah. The process is kind of a loose framework, but you have to understand people's motivations on a case by case basis, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that changes with every person and every deal. Um, and I kind of originally, stumbled across you all when looking at a Clay webinar that you did with Ben,
Oh,
and then have
mm-hmm.
been kind of following some of your content, talking about like value ladder and just like, building that
Yeah.
framework for messaging and things like that. And I really liked your how you were approaching that and talking about that in a cold email context. So I thought you'd be like a really good fit to come on and kind of talk a little bit more about kind of doing some cold email for MSPs.
Yeah.
Since you did a lot of that during your, sales, time in your MSP.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd
And
love to do it because it's a topic that I believe marketing in general for MSPs is intimidating. And it's intimidating for a couple of reasons. One you've already touched on, and that is that there's a lot of nuance to it, right? It's not as black and white as like just here's the process and go click the buttons and do the thing. I mean, you can certainly do it that way. Um, and you'll get results doing it that way. But if you want real results, like the hockey stick kind of results that MSPs actually ask for but don't know how to get, like you need to go about doing it a little bit differently. And I was excited to come on and talk to you about it because the level of awareness was already so much further along. To your point about like discovering us on a Clay webinar, if we said that in a room full of MSPs, they would immediately be thinking of like Silly Putty and the Sunday comics and like ripping the image off the page, right? Rather than the tool that has unlocked just countless amounts of potential, not only at the MSP stage, at the later stages of when I was there, but also now what we're doing here at Cyft, and really no different when we're just talking about cold email outbound that is effective and gets results. So happy to really unpack. I think it's really kind of a two-part thing. One, most MSPs that are thinking about email marketing or email campaigning, like they're actually in my experience still stuck like somewhere between 10 and 7 years ago in the ideology of what they need to go do. And what do I mean by that? I would say most MSPs like aren't even still routinely sending out something as simple as a newsletter on a monthly basis, right? Let alone vendor campaigns for a certain thing. They might have something like a constant contact, right? And like again, MailChimp, like tools from 10 years ago. And and yet still not executing those one consistently or two very effectively. And so they tend to fall in this bucket of like, well, I've tried this, but it doesn't work. Or I've done XYZ and it doesn't work. And it's like, well, there's a difference between strategy and tactics, and the tactics need to evolve and change very frequently, especially in the AI age of where we live now, where things are iterating so fast, but the strategy is pretty much time tested, right? And so if we just like put a bow on that part of the conversation, because there's no reason to talk about 10-year-old stuff, but just understand MSPs, like if you're listening to this and you still don't even have something like a list of 20,000 people and constant contact, like don't start there because everything's changed. And that's a really ineffective way to go scorched earth and like burn your brand without actually reaching the people that you wanted to convert into customers. And so I think where we'll go, Hunter, is have more of the this is what's actually working today conversation and some of the tools that we use and the strategies, because it's not ultimately about the tools. I'll only be referencing tools either one because I have personal experience with them. We're actively currently using them with Cyft to have results or whatever. So it's not to say I'm incentivized to recommend any of them or like I'm an affiliate partner. And it's none of that. It's just here's what we're using and why we're using it. So I want the audience to listen to the strategy, maybe more than the tactic, but certainly, grab the tools and go implement for yourself too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of building from the bottom up and
Hmm.
the long-term lead nurture and the email marketing with like a CRM for like newsletters and stuff is absolutely one of those like foundational pieces of building a sales and marketing program. And that's definitely kind of towards the bottom. Those were the people who already have interest in your
Yeah.
brand, and you definitely want to be continually communicating with them. um, as you move up the kind of towards the top, though, there's more of the kind of cold email, side, and those are kind of like two distinct activities.
Hmm.
And like, we briefly mentioned Clay. That's probably a little bit more of an advanced tool.
Sure.
On the cold email side, you might have a product like Instantly or Smart Lead or something like that, which is really like a all-in-one cold email solution.
Hmm.
So, let's talk a little bit about how, you would get started with like a tool like that. And just for a little bit of background info, I think I might make a good interviewer here in that I'm like kind of in market for some of those products right now
Sure.
for the agency side. I've got the back end email stuff, inbound marketing things all kind of ironed out, and I'm looking at the outbound side. So
Yeah.
let's kind of talk about the conversation in a lot of MSPs request how do I get one customer per month. So
Hmm.
let's kind of talk about the conversation in the lens of like if you want to use cold email to get roughly one customer per month, you know like let's start off with how many kind of contacts would you recommend kind of pulling into a list to
Hmm.
even begin a cold email campaign.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think there's a duality to it where if I put my I was an MSP 8 months ago hat on and I was running a sales and marketing team, one of the places that I see MSPs kind of fall short or get stuck is a better way of saying it, is by again attacking this sort of like ambiguous thing that is marketing with too big of a goal or too big of a scope. And then they get really lost in all the details and all the weeds, right? So I like the fact that you're asking the question through this lens of something that's really tactical and really practical. And like, let's just focus on if I could close one customer a month. So I'll park that by saying, like, forget everything you thought you knew, right? It's time to unlearn all of the assumptions that everyone's had for the last 10 years, in that you don't need a list of 20,000 or 50,000, right? And you don't need to overcomplicate, like, well, how do I go get the list or where do I get the list? I'm not even going to tell you to like go to Apollo and start exporting leads or anything, because I think there's a better way to go about this. And the first thing we have to do as an MSP is say, because this is an area that most struggle to, is who are we going to target? Like, what does your perfect future client look like? What is your ICP? MSPs generally call it TCP, target customer profile. It's like, who is it, right? Is it the 13 user dentist? Or is it the 73 user orthopedic surgeon? And maybe you don't like force yourself to get that specific, although I would encourage you to do that. Most don't know where to begin, and they have a scarcity mindset. So they're thinking, well, I sell anything to anyone who wants it. Like, well, that doesn't work. So let's start with the ICP portion. And the best place I've taught MSPs to do this is take your cell phone out, right? Look at the black screen and decide a client's calling you. Your phone just started ringing, right? Look at your caller ID. Think to yourself, who is the person? What's the name you want to see on that caller ID where you're like a stampede, like a Best Buy on Black Friday morning, trying to get to the phone because you want to talk to that person so badly. You enjoy picking up the phone for them. And then start writing down the characteristics of that company. Well, it happens to be maybe it's the office manager of a law firm and they do this and they do this. Like, whatever those characteristics are, that's the foundation for at least the customers that you like working with. Now, there should be a profitability component to it as well, right? Like, we want customers that are not a charity case, but keep us in business. But at any rate, I think you have to start ICP. So once you have that, and if you don't know where to start, maybe talking tools and more practically, take your PSA, right? The system where all of your content, your current clients live, export that to a CSV, take that CSV to a product like PandaMatch and upload it into PandaMatch. And that is going to be a tool that helps you start to find what would be called like a lookalike audience, essentially. So It can
Okay.
take your current clients that you filtered down to like, I only want these ones. I don't want more clients like these ones. Great. So now we have this list. Maybe it's 30 or 40 of those. Take that and go to a tool like PandaMatch and then allow it to tell you, okay, well, if those are the characteristics, then here's some lists of other like businesses based on there. So that'd be the first place that I would start. Once I had the
Interesting.
makings of a new list, um, that now you have to start thinking about, okay, well, who do I want to sell to and what do I want to say is kind of like the next phase. Almost like before you go push the buttons, you have to think about, well, what are you going to do? And the reason that I usually push to the list is the message is really what I learned when I was building the outbound sales engine at the last MSP, where we added outbound dialing, cold calling to the mix. And just maybe for some reference for anyone who doesn't know my story, the first MSP I was running sales and marketing, we were averaging $140,000 in net new MRR, closed one business annually. And then I moved to a much smaller MSP and built them their sales and marketing engine. They had nothing. And we were pacing $85,000 a year basically in net new MRR. So like zero to those numbers kind of a thing. Um, and so I made a lot of mistakes, right? I'm not like the smartest guy in the room, just like I wasn't when I was the tech. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I had to figure it out along the way too. And the list being the message, what I learned from cold calling was there were only three levers I could pull. And this ties to email marketing, which so I'm going to bring it up. The first is the quality of your list is the number one factor in the success of the campaign. Now, what does that mean? Well, first, it's like accuracy of the data, right? Am I calling a bunch of disconnected phone numbers because they went out of business during COVID, or are they actually there? Well, think of that as, are my emails validated, right? Am I going to send email to a blown mailbox, or am I going to send email to one that actually lands? Those kinds of things matter. So the quality of the list, which is the quality of your data, the quality of the caller, which might sound a little harsh when you're talking about people, but basically like how teachable, how coachable, how malleable am I? How fluid can I be so that I'm not just like a hammer with a nail ramming it down the throat? So when you look at emailing, now we're talking about, are you A/B testing, right? And are you doing so in a controllable way where you can tell which copy changes are actually moving your conversion needles, right? So the quality of what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then, which is really, I meant quality of the script. And then the third one was the quality of the person, like how malleable are you? So it's quality of the list, quality of the script, and quality of the person. So email marketing, it's quality of the list, it's quality of the copywriting, and it's your adaptability, your ability to continue to change, like don't stop. But I would actually add something else to your point about tools again. I'm glad you brought them up as well. It doesn't matter if it's Instantly or Smart Lead. Personally, Smart Lead is the one that I have a personal experience with. It's the one that we use at Cyft. And let's stop for a second and explain again, like the difference between the constant contact, even really like the HubSpots and the Salesforces of the world, right? Like they're not the same thing. Having a system that can send email on behalf of your company is not the same thing as what it takes for a cold outbound infrastructure in today's world,
Hmm.
technically. And that's really why you bring up things like Instantly or Smart Lead. And that is basically think of like distributed email infrastructure, right? Now, you became aware of Cyft because of Ben, and Ben is our go-to-market engineer, which is basically like the developer and the engineer that puts together all of these tools and all this stuff so that we have the infrastructure to even be able to send the emails. You have a question?
Yeah, but before we get dive into that,
Mm-hmm.
just to, help MSPs understand like kind of the mechanics and volume requirements, because I think a lot of MSPs just don't even understand like the volume needs of a lot of things, or just like the mechanics of how a lot of things in, sales and marketing work. So,
Right. Yeah.
let's just say if you had you were doing some A/B testing under ideal conditions, like, what sort of list size would you need to hit that sort of like one customer per month? Is it 1,000 contacts? Is it 10,000 contacts? Is it, 500?
Yeah.
What sort of like, meetings per like, list size should you expect from that? How many meetings do you
Mm-hmm.
think it would take to boil down to that like one customer per month benchmark?
Yeah. So if we applied all the asterisks of like depends on your market and all those kinds of things and just looked at sort of like macro level data, I would say A couple of things. One, let's just strip it down to like first principles and brass tacks. One would be like how many meetings can you actually handle and reasonably handle as a sales rep and like work full cycle. And let's take a couple other factors into consideration. You're in MSP, at least in my experience, you're looking at no less than generally a 90-day decision cycle from first touch to like proposal accepted. And so now you have to start thinking a little bit more 3 and 4 and 5 dimensionally of like, how can I create the system that's generating enough inputs to get enough meetings, to go through the sales process, to get enough to proposals, to get enough to decisions, to get to that one meeting a month, right? And that's not
Right.
to make it sound like it's overly complicated, because I'm a big champion of telling you to oversimplify. We tend to overcomplicate, but let's try to stick to some very basic numbers for the example. So, 80% of MSPs are still owner-led sales, right? And so we'll make that assumption that this is talking about I'm an owner, I have some other responsibilities, but sales is also still one of them. So I wouldn't be shooting for probably any more than 4 net new opportunities, high intent, high quality opportunities per month, which gives me also then what, a 25% win rate, essentially, if we cascade all that out, which is roughly industry average as well. And so just looking at some defensible numbers like that, what would it take to get one new meeting a week is really what we're talking about, which would translate into one new customer a month once you've ran the system for at least 6 months, essentially. Um, because I've found after doing it twice, I found that really it takes 6 full months anyway to get to the point where anything gets full cycle all the way through. And so you have to be willing to put in the energy and the effort at least up front for 6 months before you allow your emotions to say pull the plug. And you got to get to the point where you've given yourself a chance to win. And so with those numbers in mind, you're really not talking about, with today's kind of infrastructure and the types of emails you can send, the way you can get deliverability with something like a smart lead. You don't need 1,000 emails in every blast to try to get, 7 replies that turn into 3 meetings that turns into one that actually sticks. Because I mean, the technology's changed, but also when you get the copy right and the messaging right, that then you put into these new tools that actually get to the inbox, the primary inbox where people see the message and they want to respond, like positive reply intent. Um, you don't need the spray and pray method anymore, right? It's like the rifle approach instead of the shotgun approach. Um, Maybe to try to tie some of this again full circle, let's just, for the sake of argument right now, an owner of an MSP that wants to grow by 1 client a month could handle a highly curated list of 100 suspects for my next 12 months, right? Let's just break it down that way. So, okay, great.
Okay.
Well, where the hell do I get 100? Well, the first place I would go, because this is how I'm doing it now and how I would do it, I would use Clay. I would use, well, after I've done the PandaMatch part where I have like, who knows, maybe I already have my 100, but maybe not. So, okay, great. But I want to keep that list. Then I'm going to go to Clay. I'm going to use the local Google Maps search, and I'm going to have the keywords from my PandaMatch, right? So I might have figured out that it's like orthopedic surgeons, lawyers, and CPAs. I don't know, for the sake of that, or manufacturer, like whatever it is. There's 3 or 4 types of businesses, right, that came out of the PandaMatch qualification of who's my ICP, and then use the local Google Maps search through Clay to go find something like 100 of those within however wide you need to make the radius to get the number correct. Because again, MSPs, at the end of the day, we're still tied locally to rolling a truck when we have to. We don't do
Okay.
it all the time, but we still need to be able to do it, right? So they need to be in your service area. So figure out what that is. For us at both MSPs, really, it was like we didn't want to be more than 2.5 hours away one way from
Right.
anyone that
Right.
we serviced, right? And so, okay, just expand it to whatever, 200 miles. And that's how I would be pulling that. But it's not going to take very much, which I like the theory of constraint, right? To get to 100 prospects. And the other benefit of starting with these smaller numbers, you can still get the data back to make data-driven decisions without scorching your TAM, your target addressable market, or total
Mm.
addressable market as well, right? So let's get 100, and then I would take that to a smart lead. And then for those that don't know about like what it does or why it does it, essentially think of it as one platform to manage a bunch of distributed mailboxes so that email's going from a real mailbox to a real mailbox, just like it would be Hunter emailing Jeff or Jeff emailing Hunter or us emailing someone else. So rather than like one email that's help at or support at or marketing at or sales at, instead we have like at Cyft, we own 58 domains, something along those lines. And
Right?
within
Because
that,
you don't want to use your primary domain for
yeah,
your business.
exactly. So Cyft.AI is our primary domain. Not a single email except for password resets for the app side go out of that domain um, through God, the name of the tool for slips at the moment, which doesn't matter. But yeah, you're not going to email from your primary domain because you don't want to tarnish the reputation of the domain that you're using. And so essentially, we have a bunch of alias domains, for lack of a better word, domains that we use that are tied to it. There's a bunch of tech stuff, right? So we still go through and we do all the redirects, the DKIMs, the DMARCs, all that stuff, all the tech stuff that still has to get done. So you can see how this starts to spiderweb out like crazy, and why I call it like distributed email infrastructure, really. Um, because then we have basically at least 3 mailboxes across not all 58 domains because we're not using them yet, but they're all there and they're all warming up. So actually, we might have at least 3 in every single domain warming up. So what does warming up mean? Well, it means that that brand new mailbox that was just created is sending very human like one-to-one emails out to other known mailboxes so that it's seen by the spam gods as not being spam. So the mailboxes are warming up and becoming, real, reducing the likelihood that they get blocked.
Are you sending those to like known contacts of Cyft or other Cyft owned inboxes, or are you sending
Yeah.
those to cold prospects?
We're using during the warm-up sequence and series, we're doing that to known mailboxes of our own.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Gotcha.
And then so essentially they get past this period. I think it's like 2 to 3 weeks of a mailbox warming up. So it takes a while to like do this right, but no longer than it's going to take you to come up with your copy and the list and the messaging and all that other stuff, right? So you can do it in parallel.
And
But
how many emails would you say you need to send from a domain before it's ready?
oh, that number, I should actually pull that number from Ben, but I'll bet it's like 20, 30 maybe over that
20.
period of
Okay.
time. Yeah, and that might be way off. Ben's the guy for that, but when I'm thinking about when I've seen it happening, it's not a ton, and it doesn't happen in really tight time frames either, right? I think it's like I said, 2 to 3 weeks is like the ramp, and it's firing a couple a day. So whatever kind of the sales guy math would tell you that is.
Okay, and y'all have 58 domains, so let's kind of tie it back to the 100 prospects or
Sure.
a couple hundred prospects or whatever it is. How many,
Mhm.
um, domains do you think you need per, to reach that number of people, I guess?
I wouldn't think, without doing the napkin math, I wouldn't probably shoot for more than 5 initially, right? 5
Okay.
additional domains. That's not your primary domain. So maybe you have 6. But again, you're not emailing from your primary domain because what happens is you can have multiple mailboxes riding inside that domain, right? So I could have 5 mailboxes underneath Acme Corp 1 and 5 more mailboxes underneath Acme Corp 2, 5 mailboxes in Acme Corp 3. And so it isn't necessarily just the domain that's like the one to many. It's how many mailboxes inside the domain that you use too. And that's why it gets more and more complex, like a crazy mind map. But the benefit is, let's go back to 100. So, all right, we have 100 people, and I'm trying to book 4 meetings in a 30-day time frame. Right. So this is where I would say it gets a lot more variable because it's going to depend on like the quality of your message, the quality of your copy, and getting people to reply and want to lean in. But like if we put a caveat in that, we can still talk very reasonable numbers, right? Like I'm probably sending, in fact, I'd probably have an email have touched all 100 people, or I could, right? Because you don't want to, you can't manage that many opportunities, first of all. But let's just say like I could, volume wise, get to the point where maybe in the first month or more, I would have emailed them all. Except if I turned it into an actual playbook, it'd probably be more where I would break that down into quarters. Okay, so 25 a quarter are my suspects that I'm going to work, and we'll work through the qualification, the communication. But then I would have a communication cadence broken down for them. So I'd have at least 2 messages. Those would be A/B testing. Now, the benefit is when you have this distributed email infrastructure, and let's say I have those 5 domains and one mailbox in each one, I could actually be doing an A/B test from each mailbox, right? So now I've got 5 A/B tests going, which means 10 different messages, and I'm only burning 10 prospects to start to get the data to test those things, right? And
Mm.
where I've found the real breakdown ends up being is actually taking the time to go look at the data and then not trust your opinion, but trust the data, right? Because usually the message I think is going to perform the best isn't the one that performs the best. It's the one that I thought there's no way I should even send this. A clear example, let's talk about Ben and Cyft with real practical examples. So we were going through a fundraise process for our seed round. Started in 45, maybe 60 days ago. So we put Ben in charge of getting us in front of investors, both private equity and VCs. So he went through a very similar process that I've already outlined here. We used all those tools, and he got us, I don't know, we had to tell him to stop because he booked at least 50 meetings with PEs and VCs to get us in front of. Um, but what I wanted to get to is the point of like the kind of message that he sent, right? So one clear example, when I saw it, I freaked out because it was through my name, right? Like my name, James' name, Ben's name, a couple of co-founders is who the emails are going out from because VCs want to talk to them. So I'd get a reply back, and the very first reply, I'll never forget it either. It's probably even on social, but the subject line was, "Can I send deck pics?" Okay, so like underneath the context, it's like, I mean, I laughed my ass off too when I saw it, but I was like, holy shit. And yet there's so much personality in that, right? So like in today's world and today's culture, you can fill in the blanks on what that might have come across like. And yet to a VC who not their entire job, but like the vast majority of their day is sitting in pitch deck meetings with founders trying to get money, right? So like it was very contextually irrelevant, but it was also funny, and it was a pattern interrupt, and it broke it, and we had like a crazy reply rate. Now he was A/B testing some other ones, and his other ones were just as wild. But the point is, like, don't overthink your copy sometimes, and also don't do it, like, don't be sterile. That's awful, right? And like even to the point where "can I send deck pics" was the subject line. It was all lowercase. I wasn't capitalized. It was all just like very human, very text style language, right? It was one sentence per line. It was a space in between, right? The whole body of the next email wasn't more than like 7 lines, not even full sentences. Sometimes it was fragmented. And yet he booked just under 50 meetings for us in less than 3 weeks, I think, with VCs. And it's not just like a flash in the pan. Okay, great, he did that. Like once we got done with that, and we were in those conversations with different ones, and we're moving through that, we should be closing here in a couple of weeks. We had him focus on, okay, now we need to start recruiting, right? So because we don't hire, but we recruit. We know what we need, and then we go find the best people at it, and we recruit the shit out of them to come work for us. And so we turned him loose on, go get us a CTO campaign running, go get us a VP engineering campaign running, go get us a developer campaign running. And, you know, so his natural motion being like the data guy and the go-to-market engineer, he's pulling and scraping and grabbing all this information, aggregating the sources with Clay from primarily LinkedIn, right? And basically going through that motion. So pull the list together, lever number one, pull the copy together, lever number two, and then use something like a smart lead to actually get it in front of the one persona that you wanted to read it, and then have written your copy in such a way where people actually want to reply to it. So a couple of numbers on that, and then I'll stop talking on it. In less than 10 days, he had 16 highly qualified conversations booked with executive level people that we wanted pulled in. The other campaign, the like VP of engineering and some developers, I don't know, between the two of them, there was like 30 recruitment meetings booked, you know, in less than a week. Like it's every time we ask him to go do something, we have to tell him to stop, literally. Like, and that's the kind
Yeah,
of,
Ben's a real expert for sure.
yeah. And that's like the difference between doing what's possible today with the right tools and the right positioning and right everything we've discussed versus thinking I need to go do something and I just post on Indeed or whatever, right? One job posting to Indeed, and now I'm flooded with a bunch of stuff, nonsense that I am going to get bogged down by.
Yeah, I liked a couple of your points. I had a boss once who used to say, it was like a product meeting, talking about building a new product. He's like, the worst thing we can do is get in a room and come up with our own ideas. And then you also just gotta kind of not get do it attached to your own ideas, because like you said, you gotta
Mhm.
A/B test, you gotta try working different angles. I like the humor angle. You can try a more mechanical, straight to the point, angle. You can try the more humorous angle. I
Hmm.
also liked how Ben's like messaging really demonstrated a cultural understanding of like the VC sector,
Hmm.
because they're
Hmm.
gonna react better to that sector because it's more, Wolf of Wall Street culture wise and things like
Right.
that. If
Hmm.
you're emailing lawyers, you might try something like, you can't handle the truth. Your IT infrastructure is,
Yeah, yeah,
not working or something like
right.
that.
Yeah, because
Um,
another one of those subject lines was WTF MSP, no, wait, MSP AI, WTF ROI, right? So like MSP was the industry that we're coming from. AI is one of the main things that we care. VCs care about both because MSP, SaaS real estate is really expensive, and so is AI. Like both are the rage. So like we've hit two of the things that they'd be interested in without even saying real words. And then WTF ROI, well, that's what an investor wants, right? Is return on investment. So like again, just thinking so much so now, if you're an MSP, maybe you're not going to be that edge case, but I'm using them as illustrations because how I would say it is be the type of person that you would want to buy from, right? And like have that kind of conversation. Uh, I forget if it was Dan Sullivan or Dan Kennedy or the guy I always remember who said it was Dean Jackson. And he always says to enter the conversation that's already happening in your prospect's mind. And so that's the way, that's the language you want to use. That's where you want to enter. And that's the kind of messaging you want to use is you want to enter the conversation that's already happening in their mind. And so even in those quick subject line examples, you could see where we were interjecting right into that stream of consciousness. Like they want to return on the investment, they want to invest in MSP, and AI is what everyone wants to invest in right now. So like we had three check boxes before they even opened the email. And that might be another tip to leave behind for everyone is like mechanically speaking, every element is only there to sell the next action. So the subject line is just there to sell the first sentence is to sell them reading the second sentence. The second sentence is to sell them reading the third. And every piece of the messaging needs to be constructed that way. Um, and maybe to drive that point home specific to MSPs, we're technical people. We're problem solvers. We like to help, which generally means we over explain the shit out of everything too, which means we put way too many words on paper. So your outbound email campaign is like a wall of text, right? Because you want to over explain how amazing all this stuff is. It's like, that's not effective. What is effective is less than 7 sentences, less than 15 words per sentence, a blank space of white space in between each sentence, and a subject line that's like no less than 7 words, or excuse me, no more than 7 words.
yeah, just trying to find interest quickly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and get to the
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Okay, so, um, 100, you got 100 prospects, you're covering and sending those emails out, and you can expect to book about one meeting per week over a quarter.
Yeah, consistently.
For Yeah, and
Hmm.
then you need to refresh your list of 100 prospects each quarter and continue that on. And so as far as like the meetings to opportunities ratio, are you generally seeing when there's a reply or a meeting that's resulting in a qualified opportunity? Or is that just kind of a function of your list? Or is it
Yeah,
like you need 10 meetings to get to four opportunities, or what's any sort of ratios there?
yeah. There's a lot of nuance to those pieces, but what I would say is because of the way that you approach it this way, where there's so much constriction and constraint, the message is going to be that much better, which means higher conversion. So again, we don't need as much volume to get as much out of it. And so I don't have to top off my leads or like burn 1,000 a week to get to those same numbers, right? So 100 a quarter should actually realistically get you there. Now, the biggest variable specific to MSP prospecting is that regardless of where you are in the country, selling MSP services is an event-driven sales cycle, right? There's an insanely high likelihood that the people I prospect into are not in a position to buy right now, and that's okay. Which is also why I gave the like minimum of a 6-month timer of you need to consistently do this stuff up front without writing it off, because you have to give yourself enough time for either the events to occur. Now, what is an event? Internal guy leaves, their favorite person at the MSP leaves, they have an infrastructure failure, they have a security incident. There's like 5 main things that would happen that would cause them to realize the perceived pain of making this change is actually not as painful as actually making the change. And so you have to be out in front, to your point about like needing that email distribution and the newsletter and staying out in front of people and like making them aware of the fact that you exist before they get to the point that they're ready to look. That's why that stuff's so important, because when the event happens, that you need to be one of the people they pick up the phone and call, or they Google search and remember your name, or they have the proposal that you left off, 4 months ago, but they ghosted you or said no or whatever, but now they pick up the thing and say, hey, refresh that quote for me. We're ready to make a change. I saw that play out in both of those MSPs to the point where I actually ran my forecasting with 2 separate sets of timelines. There was the 90-day timeline. That was really like pipeline management. And then there was an 18-month horizon that I measured performance and like the revenue attribution side too, because odds odds were fairly high that even if they said no now or they ghosted us now, something would happen in the next 18 months where they'd pick up the phone and they'd call us back, and then we'd close that deal in less than a week.
Yeah, when you said 6 months earlier, I think that's like a good barometer. And I used to kind of set expectations for kind of, results of 6 months for my agency, but I've been kind of shifting that to 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
You should see traction, I think, with any channel within 6 months, but
Yeah.
this is an industry that really moves off of 3-year contracts.
Right.
So if you think, what's the midpoint where I would even have 50% of my potential prospects in market, that's an 18-month, so you're going to really get a better like understanding of like what a channel might look like on an ongoing basis at the 18-month mark, but you should
Mm-hmm.
see traction like you said within like 6 months,
Yeah.
just because there is that 90-day decision time frame, so that's 3 months right there. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's like the lead up time to really get a channel even like distributing properly.
Yeah,
So
and when you're just starting to making that assumption that maybe you haven't been doing this stuff before, you can also err on the side of doing more than just the numbers we're talking about, right? Because even one meeting a week is not quite enough velocity for you to get any better at actually selling, which we haven't talked about at all. But like, what's it take to sell to a cold prospect from outbound versus what's it take to sell what MSPs are used to selling, which isn't really selling, it's order taking. It's like the referral or the reference or the I've heard of you loosely from this other person type of thing. That's a totally different sales motion too, and you need to be able to close the cold outbound traffic, um, which is a totally different sales motion than the referral as well. And so, in order to account for that, because even in the numbers I shared, that places a fairly big assumption that you're you're at least adept at selling, right? And I would say historically and at the macro level, MSPs generally aren't, because it's not how they grew, and that's not to like point a finger or like shame any of them. It's like it's the most popular topic at any trade show, so it's obvious that it's a huge pain point for people, and I've witnessed it myself in the MSPs that I was at and other peers that I coach. And so, increase the number of opportunities, and there's no harm or shame in that because you're really just collapsing time. But it needs to be a balance of what you can truly manage well and not forget about or not blow off or not let sit, compared to, almost like getting lost in the excuse of the action that you're taking. Right. So you need to be able to respect and handle the opportunities that you're getting. Where I was at in running the last team, we needed 1.5 proposals to go out the door every week to hit our goal. So, right, in 1.5, how do you have a half a proposal? You don't. You just average it out over the course of weeks. And so, in order to get to 1.5 proposals, we needed to have at least 4 qualified net new appointments per week, right? And so, like, you could start to see that all the metrics must be reverse engineered based off of your win rate percentage, because otherwise you're totally stabbing in the dark, right? And going to the lower end of the industry averages, you'd be about 18% win rate over the whole pipeline, right? So like of all the meetings that were taken, did they stay in long enough? Did they go to proposal? Like all of that. If you just kind of looked at the higher level stuff, about 18% of the first appointments are going to go all the way through to proposal in that first sales motion versus the whole back end long tail sales process we talked about before.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then you're probably looking at 5 meetings to get a qualified meeting that or proposal quality lead, and then you're, let's just say closing 1 in 5 proposals. Is that fair?
Yeah, off the bat, like that should be a minimum baseline, basically, right? Like, and then optimize everything to get better from those numbers at every stage, because that's one of the beauties of the way marketing and sales funnels works is like the compounding effect of increasing conversion across the whole thing is just insane. It's the difference between 1 client a month and 4 clients a month, right? A couple of small adjustments, and um, it's the it's the thing to focus on once you actually have meetings and prospects and all the other components happening is how do I optimize for conversion at every stage.
Okay. So then probably looking at more of a need for like 20 to 25 meetings per month. Um, if you're
Yeah.
kind of really starting out and raw on your pipeline, what would you to hit 20 to 25 meetings per month, what would your number of raw prospects lists kind of scale up to from there?
Yeah, inside that same time window, I'd probably be
300 to 500?
yeah, I was going to say it's probably going to land right into that 425-ish range just based off of replies, timelines, all the kind of standard metrics you should expect out of the communication cycle and the acceptance rates and those kinds of things. Yeah, probably right into that 4 to 5 to give yourself a little extra cushion, 500 prospects in that quarterly cycle we were talking about.
And then when you've got the A/B testing working and gotten the well-oiled machine, you can start to compress your,
Yep.
quarterly lead needs down to more in that 100 to 200 range
Yeah,
to hit your
exactly.
meeting.
Yeah, because you need to have, there's fewer, you have to put fewer opportunities in the pipe to get the same output, right? That's kind of the beauty of it is you can which also, by the way, doesn't mean, oh, if I only start with 3, then that's like 200 more that I'm not even, they aren't even gonna know I'm gonna exist. Like scarcity mindset's the first thing that destroys marketing for MSPs, I think, which is why we make everything so much bigger and crazier than it needs to be. It's like, no, those other 200, they're gonna be there next quarter. Like it's not that we're not gonna talk to them. It's just we'll put them in the hopper next quarter or next month or whenever we need to. So don't approach it through a scarcity mindset. It's really an abundance mindset. Um, they're not going anywhere. Just to be there.
Okay, cool. Um, I'm just curious, have you gone like, done kind of email programs versus more of a like targeted approach that you've been describing and talking about, more of a well-researched and personalized approach versus just a higher volume kind of, blasting type approach?
Yeah.
Have you seen, can you talk a little bit about the compare and contrast on running each type of program and
Mhm.
just the pros and cons of each?
Yeah. So I'll put these into those two same camps we were talking about earlier, right? The spray and pray approach of like the constant contact, 20,000 things, send one message to all 20,000 people and hope that something resonates. That to me is the overreaction to that methodology is the hyper personalization that's happening in the market too right now with like all these wild cards and like take for example, I'm a decent example, I think, because my name is out there 2 different ways. And I actually And probably because I'm
What do you mean two different
and
ways?
like I'm either Jeff or I'm Jeffrey, right? And like the
Oh,
other way that I deal with stuff on like opt-in forms and whatnot is by like having certain spellings wrong or like spelling it a certain way, not capitalized, capitalized. So those to me are like little breadcrumbs of is this genuine or is this personalization? And by personalization, we're talking about all the variables that can be used, right? So like you have scraped data in a list or in a table that could look at anything that's public. So like my LinkedIn profile, as an example, I'm Jeffrey Newton on my LinkedIn profile, which is fine. There's a bunch of other stuff that's there. And so if someone's using hyper personalization, really all that means is that they're using some tools to go out to places like LinkedIn, scrape a bunch of content or context off of Jeffrey Newton, and then putting it into different tables. And then in their message or messaging, they're calling to those variables in line or in sentence, right? And I think because it's possible and because it's so easy to do, people try to do way too much of it. And then as a result, us as buyers, prospects, cold traffic, our bullshit meter and like our sensitivity level to that stuff is so high that it doesn't feel human either, right? Because no one talks with that level of specificity about things that are totally irrelevant, like some post that I made whenever ago, right? Or a pinned post on my featured profile, which is the thing they reference, which has nothing to do with maybe what I do. And so you can kind of see where data without context can be more damaging than having a congruent message hit my inbox. And so I like to paint those two poles because I think that's where those are and say our strategy, what we found to be most effective is dialing back the personalization and getting that much better at the targeting specifically and then the messaging that we tie to it so that when we're sending a campaign, we know with an insanely high level of certainty that everyone on that list happens to be an executive director at a nonprofit in the uh, food security industry or whatever, right? So, like, well, if that's true, and every person that's going to receive this message is an executive director at a nonprofit, like food shelter, well, now I can tailor the message to be so dialed in and so crystal clear on the problems they have and the future state, like the promise of the future they want, but they don't have,
mm-hmm.
that I don't need the personalization. And I will enter the conversation that's happening in their mind. And I'm going to be that much more useful and meaningful and valuable, which is where we're seeing that's where you get the high reply rate, which is ultimately like the metric that matters most is the high level of replies or the reply rate in general. Um, because I also think of this through a similar lens of like the LinkedIn gurus that try to sell you, here's how to make money on LinkedIn. Like their message is, rather than just putting out a bunch of content or spending 10 hours a day on LinkedIn, let me show you how to make money on it. And they're essentially saying, don't optimize for likes or comments or engagement, optimize for leads, which I can't disagree with. Like if your ultimate goal is there to make money, then that's where that is. Um, and in order to do that or how to do that is by optimizing for the reply, the engagement, right? The true reaction or response out of the audience that you were trying to reach.
Okay. Yeah, which all that kind of ties back into knowing your customer again.
Mhm.
And instead of having to know their name to throw in the variable, you know their problems and what their desired end state is and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah, and
Um,
maybe to tie a bow on what I just said there. So we have that same list of maybe 500 now. Really, what we're talking about is segmentation of that list, right? So let's not treat all 500 like the exact same person. Let's look at who they are, what their title is, what industry they were in, and then segment that to the point where um, we can write the one message with the one problem to the one persona and have it land. And so maybe you have 7 messages that you're going to send to those 500 people because there's 7 personas wrapped up in the list. That's how I would be approaching that.
okay. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation, as evidenced by us bumping up on time here.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I did not ask you that you'd like to tell the audience before we wrap up?
Hmm. No, the only thing I would try to put an emphasis on is if you aren't doing anything now, don't go do what the industry's told you to do for the last 10 years. There's a totally different playbook out there to use. Go look up Clay on LinkedIn. Go start studying what the hell's a GTM engineer, go to market engineering, because those are the tools that are actually moving the needle today. So things like what we mentioned here today, Smart Lead, Instantly, PandaMatch. Again, I'm not affiliated with any of them. There's other tools that are out there too, but go find the hyper focused tools that are there to do the job that you need done and pull together the orchestra of tools you need to get it done rather than like the Constant Contact or the MailChimp of the days past.
Okay, awesome. Well, we will definitely get your info and Cyft.AI's info into the show notes here, and maybe even Ben's info since we talked about
Yeah.
him a little bit. Definitely excited to see where the Cyft product goes. Sounds like y'all have got a lot of exciting things in the works. I saw the website's still in kind of the stealth mode a little bit
Yeah. Back to
stage.
stealth mode. Yep.
So we'll
Yeah.
definitely have to, get you back on when things have developed a little bit more, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that and how you're making an impact with the MSPs with the new AI agents.
Yeah. Would love to. And if anyone wants to follow along, you can just find me on LinkedIn, Jeffery Newton at Cyft or MSP Insider Show. One of the two. It's all there.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks, Jeff, for coming on the show, and until next time.
Yeah. Thanks, Hunter. Appreciate it.
I hope you liked this episode. If you did, be sure to like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff there, and stay tuned for some of the upcoming episodes we'll have with other guests that will share their expertise on marketing and sales for MSPs. Be sure to check out Jeff and Ben and Cyft.AI in the show notes here, and check out their product and learn more about their experience. Again, I hope you liked the episode. I'm Hunter Nelson with Tortoise and Hare Software, and thanks for watching.